Hey, you ever wonder why so many cities in America feel like they're getting hollowed out? Between 2020 and 2024, dozens of U.S. cities actually lost population, even as many others reversed losses in 2023, 2024. When a city loses people, its tax base shrinks, public services weaken, infrastructure decays, and crime often spikes. It becomes a vicious feedback loop. For example, Baltimore's 2024 estimate is about 568,271 residents, down from 585,708 in 2020. San Francisco lost more than 32,000 people since 2020 and continues losing thousands each year. Even Detroit, yes, Detroit, saw its population grow slightly in 2024, making waves in a city otherwise known for decades of decline. Meanwhile, many cities in the Midwest and Northeast are seeing double-digit percentage drops over the past few decades. The exodus is real, and it's accelerating in 2025. Today, we're looking at the 10 cities everyone is fleeing. Places where the population's dropping so fast, your city might be next. Buckle up. Number 10. Oakland, California. Oakland is the kind of city that looks great on a postcard if you're standing at the right angle. But the reality on the ground is something else entirely. This place has been bleeding residents like a stuck pig in the last decade, and 2025 has made the trend crystal clear. In the 1950s, Oakland topped 400,000 residents. By 2023, it was hovering around 420,000. But here's the kicker. For the first time in decades, more people are actively fleeing than moving in. Why? Crime, cost, and chaos. Let's start with crime. Oakland's violent crime rate has been stuck at around 1,300 per 100,000 residents, 3 times the national average, and car thefts are practically a local sport, with over 15,000 reported in 2023 alone. That's about 40 cars a day disappearing into thin air. On top of that, housing is completely out of reach. Median home prices are still above $850,000, while the median household income sits under $80,000. You're spending more than 50% of your paycheck just to exist here, and that doesn't even cover utilities or California's notoriously high taxes. Add to that the fact that San Francisco's downturn is spilling into Oakland like a flood, and businesses are shutting down faster than they can board up the windows. Walgreens, Starbucks, even local mom-and-pop shops. Everyone's fleeing because security costs more than the customers bring in. Families with kids are especially getting out because Oakland Unified has closed more than a dozen schools since 2012, with more closures looming as enrollment collapses. It's a death spiral. No schools, no families, no future. Number 9. Portland, Oregon. Now let's head north to Portland, a city that went from quirky and lovable to chaotic and unlivable in the span of a decade. This was once the hipster capital of America. Craft beer, coffee shops, bike lanes, and organic everything. But in 2025, it's one of the fastest emptying cities in the Pacific Northwest. Portland's population peaked at about 652,000 in 2020, but post-pandemic decline and relentless urban decay have sent thousands packing. And it's not just anecdotal. Recent reports estimate a net loss of over 14,000 residents in just 2 years, which is massive for a city this size. What's driving it? First, crime has spiraled out of control. With 1,000 violent crimes per 100,000 residents and property crime rates pushing 5 times the national average, it feels less like a city and more like a free-for-all. Entire downtown blocks are ghost towns after businesses like REI, Nike, and countless restaurants pulled out due to theft and safety issues. Combine that with a homelessness crisis that's left nearly 6,000 people living on the streets, and the once vibrant neighborhoods now look like refugee camps. And the kicker is that Portland's housing costs are still absurdly high. The median rent is hovering around $2,800 a month, while median household income is barely $70,000, well below what's needed to survive in a high-cost West Coast city. Add a shrinking tax base, schools losing funding, and constant political gridlock, and the writing is on the wall. Portland tried to sell itself as weird, but in 2025 it's not weird. It's unsafe, unaffordable, and unlivable, and people are heading for the exits. Number 8. Chicago, Illinois. If you've been paying attention, you knew Chicago would show up on this list. Once nicknamed the city that works, Chicago in 2025 looks more like the city that bleeds tax dollars. This is a place where the population peaked in 1950 at 3.6 million and now sits at about 2.7 million and still shrinking. In just the last decade, Chicago has lost nearly 100,000 residents, and it's not just the cold winters pushing them out. Let's start with crime. Chicago logged over 700 homicides in 2023, and though that's down from its peak in 2021, it's still one of the highest murder tallies in the nation. Add in carjackings, burglaries, and a police force stretched thinner than a gas station hot dog, and people are making the calculation. It's safer to move out than to stick it out. But crime isn't the only story. Chicago is broke, like billions in debt broke. The city's pension obligations are more than $46 billion, and residents know exactly what that means: higher property taxes, more fees, and fewer services. The median household income is about $65,000, but the cost of living is closer to Los Angeles levels, without the weather or the scenery to soften the blow. On top of that, Illinois has been hemorrhaging businesses thanks to sky-high corporate taxes and regulatory red tape. Boeing and Caterpillar already bailed, and smaller firms are quietly following. Schools are failing too. Chicago public schools report chronic absenteeism rates above 40%, which means entire generations are slipping through the cracks. It's not a mystery why everyone's leaving, it's survival. Number 7, New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans is one of those cities you want to love. It's got jazz, history, Mardi Gras, and food you can't get anywhere else. But living there full-time in 2025, that's a nightmare scenario for a growing number of residents. Let's start with the numbers. New Orleans peaked in 1960 at 627,000 residents. Today, it's barely hanging on at around 370,000, and it's still sliding downhill. The biggest problem here is vulnerability. The city sits below sea level, and after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, it never truly recovered. Billions in federal money poured in, but 2 decades later the infrastructure is still crumbling. Roads are cratered, drainage systems fail every time it rains, and insurance premiums are through the roof. In fact, Louisiana's insurance crisis is so bad that multiple carriers have left the state, leaving homeowners paying up to $6,000 annually just to keep their houses covered. Crime is another nightmare. The violent crime rate in New Orleans is nearly 1,400 per 100,000 residents, and the murder rate is consistently one of the highest in the nation. 70 homicides per 100,000 residents in 2022, which makes it more dangerous than parts of Mexico. Couple that with poverty. Median household income here is under $45,000, and you've got a recipe for mass exodus. Businesses are closing, schools are underfunded, and families who can afford to leave are moving to Baton Rouge, Houston, or Atlanta in droves. It's heartbreaking because New Orleans is a cultural treasure, but in terms of sustainability, it's losing the fight. Number 6, Memphis, Tennessee. Rounding out this segment is Memphis, a city that once had promise but now has people packing up moving trucks as fast as they can rent them. Memphis hit its peak in 1970 with about 650,000 residents. By 2025, that number has dropped to just over 620,000, and experts predict it will dip below 600,000 within the decade. Why? Because Memphis is ground zero for violent crime in America. With a violent crime rate of nearly 2,300 per 100,000 residents, Memphis is officially the most dangerous large city in the United States. Carjackings, robberies, and homicides are daily headlines, and locals will tell you it feels like law enforcement is permanently on its back foot. But the problems don't end there. Memphis has one of the weakest economies of any major U.S. city, with a median household income of only $43,000, far below the national average. At the same time, inflation has made even basic living costs skyrocket. Food prices in Tennessee jumped over 10% in 2023 alone, and when your paycheck is already stretched thin, that's enough to push families into bankruptcy. Add in a public school system ranked among the worst in the state, pothole-riddled streets, and a job market that's overly reliant on low-wage logistics and warehouse work, and you start to see why Memphis is losing people by the busload. Even FedEx, the company that made Memphis a logistics hub, has been quietly shifting operations elsewhere. Residents are tired of feeling unsafe, underpaid, and unheard, and in 2025, they're voting with their feet. Number 5. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Philadelphia is America's oldest capital, home of the Liberty Bell and cheesesteaks. But in 2025, it's also home to one of the largest urban exoduses in the nation. Philly's population peaked around 1950 at 2.1 million, and while it clawed back from its 1990s decline, today the numbers are sliding again. As of 2023, it sits around 1.56 million, but the trend line is pointing down fast. Why? Let's start with crime. Philadelphia reported over 500 homicides in 2022, a murder rate that rivals Central American cities known for cartel violence. Add in robbery, assault, and a car theft epidemic topping 23,000 incidents in 2023. And you've got a city where leaving your house feels like a gamble. The schools aren't faring any better. Philadelphia School District has nearly 70% of its students classified as economically disadvantaged, and dropout rates hover around 18%. Infrastructure is collapsing too. Bridges in disrepair, potholes like sinkholes, and public transit ranked among the worst for reliability. Meanwhile, taxes are sky high. Philadelphia has a city wage tax of 3.79% for residents, stacked on top of Pennsylvania's state tax, making it one of the most expensive cities to simply work in. Businesses are bailing for the suburbs, and families are following them. Even median household income, $54,000, is nearly $20,000 below the national average, while rents average over $1,100 a month. Add it all up: crime, poverty, collapsing infrastructure, taxes, and schools that don't prepare kids for anything but disappointment. Philadelphia has history, sure, but in 2025 it also has a growing list of residents saying goodbye. Number 4. San Francisco, California. San Francisco used to be the crown jewel of the West Coast, a city of innovation, booming tech jobs, and Golden Gate glory. But in 2025, it's one of the most dramatic examples of urban decline in modern American history. Population peaked around 2019 at nearly 890,000. By 2023, it had dropped below 810,000, and new projections show it could sink below 750,000 by 2030. The reasons are as clear as the fog rolling across the bay. First, cost of living. The median home price in San Francisco is still a staggering $1.2 million, while median household income, $119,000, can't keep pace with mortgage rates and a $5,000 rent for a two-bedroom apartment. Then there's crime and quality of life. Car break-ins have become a meme, with over 20,000 reported in 2022 alone, and open-air drug use has left entire districts looking like scenes from a dystopian movie. Retailers can't take the losses. Nordstrom, Whole Foods, and countless small shops have abandoned downtown, leaving Union Square looking like an abandoned mall. Add in a homelessness crisis that exceeds 8,000 people within city limits, and the once world-class city by the bay feels like it's collapsing under its own contradictions. Even the tech industry, the lifeblood of San Francisco, is bailing. Companies are relocating to Austin, Miami, or Seattle, and those who remain are telling employees to work remotely, which leaves commercial towers half empty. The city is facing a $780 million budget deficit for 2025, and officials are warning of tax hikes that will push even more middle-class families out. San Francisco isn't just declining, it's imploding in plain sight. Number 3. Birmingham, Alabama. Now let's shift gears to Birmingham, Alabama, a city that never really recovered from the collapse of American steel, and is now seeing one of the sharpest population slides in the South. Birmingham's population peaked at about 340,000 in 1960. Fast forward to 2023, and that number has plummeted to just 196,000. That's nearly half its population gone in 2 generations. The reasons are brutal and layered. For starters, poverty is crushing. Median household income in Birmingham is a paltry $39,000, well below the national average. Nearly 24% of residents live below the poverty line, one of the highest rates of any large U.S. city. That kind of economic despair fuels crime, and Birmingham has no shortage. The violent crime rate is roughly 1,600 incidents per 100,000 residents, putting it consistently near the top of America's most dangerous cities. The education system? Collapsing. Birmingham City schools report that less than 20% of high school juniors are proficient in math, and many schools operate on decades-old facilities that should have been condemned years ago. The job market doesn't offer much either. The city leans heavily on low-wage healthcare and service jobs, while higher-paying industries like tech or finance are practically non-existent. Infrastructure is another black eye. Roads and water systems rank among the worst in the Southeast, and residents complain of constant boil water notices. Add in rising utility costs and a growing brain drain of young people heading for Atlanta, Nashville, or even Huntsville, and Birmingham is shrinking before our eyes. Once called the Pittsburgh of the South, it's now a cautionary tale of what happens when a city never reinvents itself. Number 2, Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland, the city on Lake Erie that gave us rock and roll, LeBron James, and the burning Cuyahoga River, is once again making headlines in 2025, but not for anything you'd brag about. This is a city that peaked in 1950 at 914,000 residents. Today, it's barely holding on at 370,000. That's a population collapse of nearly 60% in 70 years, one of the steepest declines in U.S. history. The reasons are as deep as they are depressing. Cleveland's median household income is just $32,000, less than half the national average, and nearly one-third of residents live below the poverty line. That economic misery is matched by sky-high crime rates. More than 2,200 violent crimes per 100,000 residents, making Cleveland one of the most dangerous big cities in America. Schools aren't a refuge either. The Cleveland Metropolitan School District has a graduation rate hovering around 74%, and test scores are among the lowest in Ohio. Then there's infrastructure. Water pipes older than most of its residents, roads that are patched more often than they're paved, and an airport that looks frozen in the 1980s. Even the job market is stagnant. Once a hub of manufacturing might, the city has never successfully transitioned to new industries. Hospitals like the Cleveland Clinic provide some stability, but those jobs require education most locals can't afford. Add a brutal winter climate and some of the highest property taxes in the state, and you have a recipe for exodus. Families aren't just moving out of Cleveland, they're moving out of Ohio altogether. The mistake on the lake nickname? In 2025, it feels less like a joke and more like a prophecy. Number 1, Detroit, Michigan. And topping the list, no surprise to anyone who's been paying attention, is Detroit, the poster child for urban decline in America. Detroit peaked in 1950 with a staggering 1.85 million residents. By 2023, the number had shriveled to $635,000, and projections suggest it will fall below 560,000 by 2030. That's not just decline, that's freefall. The collapse of the auto industry gutted the city's economic core, and while Ford and GM are still around, automation and outsourcing mean they don't need the armies of workers that once made Detroit a middle-class paradise. The city's median household income is a shocking $35,000, and more than 30% of residents live below the poverty line. Violent crime? It's off the charts. Nearly 2,700 violent crimes per 100,000 residents, making Detroit one of the most dangerous cities not just in the U.S., but in the entire industrialized world. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned. An estimated 70,000 buildings sit vacant, creating eerie urban wastelands. Public services are stretched to the breaking point. Police response times can exceed an hour, and EMS crews sometimes can't cover all the calls in a single night. Schools have been shuttered en masse, forcing kids into crumbling facilities with overcrowded classrooms. Even downtown's much-hyped revival has been more cosmetic than real. Yes, there are trendy bars and an arena for the Red Wings, but the surrounding city is still collapsing. And here's the most chilling part. Detroit filed for bankruptcy in 2013, the largest municipal bankruptcy in U.S. history. A decade later, it's still struggling to claw its way out. But residents aren't waiting. They're leaving. Detroit may once have been the Motor City, but in 2025, the only engines running are in U-Haul trucks, headed out of town. And there you have it, 10 American cities where people are packing up and getting out in 2025. These aren't just small dips, we're talking decades of collapse, with some cities losing over half their population since the 1950s, poverty rates sitting 10 to 20 points above the national average, and violent crime rates that are 2 to 3 times higher than the U.S. norm. The U-Haul numbers don't lie either. Reports show that outbound moves from cities like San Francisco, Cleveland, and Detroit have skyrocketed in the last 2 years, while nearby suburbs and Sunbelt towns are soaking up the growth. The story here is simple. When a city can't provide safety, schools, and jobs, people vote with their feet. The only question now is which city ends up next on the list.